Hello and welcome back. One of the people I've always found immensely fascinating is Imelda Marcos, the First Lady of the Philippines, the former First Lady of the Philippines. And I suppose she's undoubtedly one of the most controversial and infamous political and social figures, certainly the modern era anyway. She was known for her incredibly expensive taste and lavish spending. And she and her husband, Ferdinand Marcos, the former president of the Philippines, for 21 years, acquired a massive fortune by stealing billions and billions of pounds from the Filipino people. She led a lavish lifestyle during a time of economic crisis in the Philippines, which of course eventually culminated in her being thrown out of the country, quite rightly so. Born in Manila in July 2nd, in 1929 on July 2nd, into the Romualdez political dynasty, she grew up in a wealthy family. After the family suffered numerous financial setbacks during the 1930s, they moved away from the capital to maintain a simpler lifestyle in the country. After completing high school and a university degree, she returned to Manila to live with relatives who had political connections in the capital. And thanks to those connections, she found work in the country's central bank in 1952. The following year, she also joined the Miss Manila beauty pageant, where she was declared the co-winner. Now, while attending a budget hearing at the Philippine Congress in April 1954, she met her future husband, Ferdinand Marcos. Ferdinand had already been married by virtue of common law to Carmen Ortega, with whom he already had 3 children. Now, this common law family were very quickly removed from the public eye once he set his sights on Imelda, and the two were subsequently secretly married only 11 days after they'd met each other, with the official reception taking place 2 weeks later. 11 years later, her husband had risen through the political ranks and successfully run for president. Imelda played a major role in popularizing his campaign. Crowds attended his campaign events simply to have a look at Imelda. This is very reminiscent of Eva Perón, isn't it? The similarities are quite striking. Campaign strategists were very much aware of Imelda's appeal, asking her to always appear at her very best while she was in public, and of course to wear her signature tonos, a form of national dress in the Philippines. She graced all of the formal events with a tono, and it became her signature feature. It became what she was known for. And in fact, the 2016 Miss Philippines Maxine Medina even wrongly attributed the invention of the tono to Imelda, even though it had been commonly worn by Filipino women for decades prior to this. Nonetheless, Imelda Marcos transformed it into becoming the dress of choice for all formal occasions in the Philippines. She also enchanted voters during the campaign with her singing, performing a number of traditional folk songs along the way. The Marcoses wanted to present themselves and fashion themselves after the Kennedys. After becoming First Lady, her husband, by executive order, appointed her as head of a new cultural center in Manila, and she initiated the Share for Progress seed dispersal program, a project that suggested making vegetable gardens out of idle plots of land all over the country. I mean, that's not a bad idea, really, is it? Shortly after Imelda's rise as a public figure, her unquenchable thirst for power, fortune, fame, and exuberance became evident. In 1966, when the Beatles were touring the country, she invited them to host a private performance for her and her family. Unfortunately for her, they declined that invitation. At her insistence, though, because I presume she wasn't used to being told no, she had all of the airports locked down in Manila to prevent them from leaving the country. In 1968, the American actress Dovie Beams arrived in Manila to play the female lead in a propaganda film for the president entitled Mahalika. She had an affair with the president, and Imelda wasn't that bothered because she actually used it as leverage to gain more political power and independence for herself. She was subsequently appointed as the governor of Metro Manila and later as the Minister of Human Settlements. Now, with Ferdinand Marcos's health declining, he increasingly allowed his wife to take over many of his presidential duties, sending her on official visits abroad as the de facto vice president, essentially. Through her travels, she became friends with US Presidents Nixon and Reagan, as well as dictators such as Gaddafi, Hussein, Castro, and Tito. In 1971, Imelda also attended Iran's 2,500-year anniversary celebration, hosted by the Shah of Iran, of the founding of the Persian Empire. A trip which provided her with a social introduction to some of the world's wealthiest people. She liked to portray herself as an intimate with movie stars and heads of state, and she did manage to become a regular on the international party circuit. There was something about the Filipino dictator's wife which seemed to make her an irresistible companion for some of the world's most visible personalities, always, of course, making sure that she was the center of attention. It was widely known that once Imelda started partying, there was really no stopping her, and she would always be the last to leave. She sounds a bit like Princess Margaret. With her beauty and charm, she enchanted the world's most influential figures. Fidel Castro once famously said that he only drove for two women, his mother and Imelda Marcos. In 1972, Imelda and her husband, sick of the limitations placed upon them through the democratic process, how awful for them, announced martial law in the country for the purpose of creating what they called a new society. And because of her active involvement in politics at the time, many of her critics referred to the martial law era as a conjugal dictatorship, of which she was known as the beautiful half. When the Philippines hosted the 1974 Miss Universe pageant, Imelda wanted to make sure that Manila would have great weather, so she demanded that her husband order the Philippine Air Force to seed the clouds and prevent the typhoon from forming. She also dispatched a plane to collect white sand from Australia for a beach resort opening. Can you imagine? Imelda's thirst for partying and her extravagance and her outrageous demands led her and her husband to loot billions from the people of the Philippines, which she used to fund several New York real estate purchases as well as lavish townhouse parties. Incredibly, she even considered buying the Empire State Building at one stage for over £500 million. But she changed her mind because she thought, and wait for this, the price was too ostentatious. She would spend money like there was no tomorrow, seeming to believe that the source of her wealth was limitless. I mean, I suppose it was limitless when you're looting the economy. She would spend tens of thousands of pounds during retail trips abroad, unbelievably once ordering a private jet to turn back to Rome because she forgot to buy cheese. No exact figures can be determined for the amount of wealth Imelda and Ferdinand acquired through the entire 21 years of the Marcos regime, but one prominent Marcos-era economist has suggested that it could be as high as £20 billion. She seemed to have the world at her feet, until, of course, the Marcos Empire suddenly came crashing down in 1986, when they were unseated and expelled from the Philippines, setting off decades of court action, which continue to this day. When they suddenly vacated their home in the Philippines, it was found that she owned 3,000 pairs of shoes, which is probably what she became most famous for, in addition to a huge collection of art and jewelry, including a 70-carat light blue diamond worth $5.5 million. $5.5 million is at least 400 times her husband's official annual salary. The revelation of her collection turned her into a household fashion and luxury icon overnight, undeservedly so. In Philippine English, the adjective Imeldific, which is coined to describe anything exaggeratedly extravagant, is used. She also has a psychological condition named after her, the Imelda Marcos syndrome, which is the tendency of not being afraid to shamelessly flaunt your extravagance without remorse. Imelda and her family fled to Hawaii, where Ferdinand died in 1989, and in February 1995, the United States District Court in Hawaii ruled against the Marcoses and awarded $1.5 billion to over 9,500 victims of human rights violations during the Marcos dictatorship. This decision was upheld by the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in 1996. However, the ruling has never been enforced in the Philippines due to jurisdiction issues. The U.S. do not have jurisdiction over the Philippines. Imelda herself was found guilty of corruption in the mid-1990s and sentenced to 12 years in prison, but the conviction was overturned on appeal. In 2018, she was again convicted of corruption charges for activities during her time as governor of Metro Manila, and that case is still currently under appeal. Yet despite the ongoing legal proceedings and her husband's dishonorable exit from the presidency, Imelda wasn't done with politics yet. She returned to the Philippines in the early 1990s and unsuccessfully ran for the presidency twice. She did manage, though, to successfully run for office, being elected as a congresswoman in 1995, 2010, 2013, and again in 2016 for a final term. So obviously the Filipino people liked something about her. She remained politically active and relevant to this day. She's 92 at the moment and enjoys good relationships with the current Filipino president. She also continues to maintain denial of any wrongdoing, repeatedly stating that her conscience is clear and she sleeps well at night. In 2006, she even launched her own fashion label, the Imelda collection, which includes various lines of clothing, shoes, as well as jewelry designed by her daughter, Ime. The collection is a testimony to the fact that despite all of the controversy surrounding her, she still remains an icon of luxury around the world. Upon launching the fashion label in Manila, her daughter described the collection as a reminder of the Imelda spirit. So there you have it, Imelda Marcos. Was she a luxury icon, or was she the queen of corruption who milked her country's economy dry? I think one thing I find quite fascinating is the similarity to Eva Perón. And I do wonder if that was coincidence or a conscious effort on Imelda's part to model herself after Evita. I suppose we'll never know. But there you have it. That's Imelda Marcos. Fascinating lady. Not a particularly nice lady, but a fascinating one all the same. And looks like she's still revered and still thought quite highly of in the Philippines, if they, elected her into their Congress 4 times. What's your take on Imelda? What do you think about her? Let me know in the comments below. I'll see you in the next video.